Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar entitled The Enterprise PPM and PMO Blueprint, Strategies and Best Practices. This webinar is jointly hosted by Infotech Research Group and Instantis. Before we get going with the main part of the webinar, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. The presentation will last about 30 to 40 minutes, and after that we've allotted time for questions that you may ask. We would like to make this webinar as interactive as possible. However, the phone lines for the attendees will be muted, so please use the chat box and the question box located on the right-hand side of your screens to communicate with the administrators and the presentation team. For any technical questions or issues, please use the chat box. For questions on topics, please use the questions panel. This will enable your questions to go directly to the presenters. We will make the presentation material available to all attendees after the webinar, so that should give you a bit more time to listen rather than concentrate on taking notes. To kick off the presentation, I would like to introduce Wayne Kakomo, the VP of Marketing with Instantis, who will introduce himself and the featured speaker. Over to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Jamal. Before I introduce our featured speaker, I just want to say a word about Instantis in case you're not familiar with us. We're a leading provider of on-demand enterprise project and portfolio management software used by IT and business process leaders to improve strategy execution through better work and resource management. And with me today is Barry Cousins, who is a senior research analyst at Infotech Research Group, and Barry's going to lead the discussion today. How you doing, Barry?
Great, thanks, Wayne. How are you?
Okay. Barry, before you get started, allow me to tell our audience a little bit about you and a little bit about your background. One of Barry's specialties at Infotech Research is, of course, project and portfolio management, obviously, and he complements his extensive with an extensive background in technology, IT management, and business leadership. Prior to joining Infotech, Barry spent 12 years as CEO of Entry Software, and in that role, he advised IT and business leaders on methodologies for managing teams, people, and their work with project management and help desk software. And he also worked with C-level executives to design dashboards and scorecards that visualize their investment in people. Earlier in his career, Barry spent 15 years with what is now called TD Canada Trust as an information technologist. He focused on the development of new distribution channels, playing key roles in the company's industry-leading telephone and internet banking offerings. He's also the author of One Task List, which is a business fable aimed at mid-market IT leaders looking to balance supply and demand. Barry, are you ready to get started?
Sure am, Wayne. Thanks.
Okay, the floor is yours.
All righty. Well, thanks, everyone, for attending today. Wanted to just jump in. We're going to talk about Enterprise PPM and a PMO blueprint, and hoping you can see my screen. So essentially what I've put up here as an agenda is what everyone would have seen in the invite and what you're registered for, but I'm going to give you a simpler view. So really we're looking at these 5 questions today. Why pursue an EPPM strategy? How it can deliver business benefits? What are the challenges? And what does the deployment roadmap look like? And really, who can we learn from? So as people are contemplating going down this road in a more formal way, where do we look for lessons and examples? So I wanted to start, though, with framing a definition of EPPM. And, I tend to find, a lot of conversations with people who are IT people originally, and they have the traditional IT view of what project portfolio management is. And when we have talks about enterprise portfolio management, it's a little bit different. So I just wanted to frame that out. We come from a background, I think a lot of us, where it was a very formal and structured concept, and we were working with the resources in IT mainly, and a pretty highly governed approach to how we planned the work and then ultimately how we executed it. And what we see is a lot of these forces taking us to more of an enterprise-wide view, with enterprise PPM. And now we're dealing with, hastily thrown together cross-departmental teams working on a lot of initiatives together, and really the kind of a driver to also include those kinds of work that are less formal and less structured. So, what we find time and time again is that the traditional thoughts around what PPM is need to be stretched a little bit to include an enterprise-wide view. And so a lot of folks really need to focus on that question right up front is, what are the differences? So that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. I thought I'd start with, I guess this is my take on a historical perspective, around how we got here. And if you go back to the early 80s and we saw, things like Harvard Project Manager, if anyone's old enough to remember that, in those days, the complexity of the work was pretty low. We saw, again, mainly IT-focused, work management, where execution was closely managed. So, you'd see kind of a one-at-a-time work order kind of structure, where the folks were working in a very managed environment. And then as we saw decentralization of the technology happen with client-server and then ultimately web technologies, that kind of happened at about the same time as, we got the whole employee empowerment trend going. So what that really meant was that we were empowering the employees to execute, to do their jobs. They'd be working on more initiatives concurrently rather than just one at a time. And execution was not managed as closely as it had been. So the complexity of the work really skyrocketed throughout the 90s, and then with the growth of cross-departmental projects in the last decade, that just made it really hard to manage. And then at the same time, what I've done is layered on, this is again my view of what I've seen tool capability go through. And I think really for that period throughout the 90s, we saw the tools lag the complexity of the work. And then, this explosion in the tool sets around 2000 with multi-user web-based tools, collaborative project management, I think was a term we all threw around then. And then, the inclusion of ticketing kinds of structures to handle reactive work too, as more and more of the vendors sought to capture more of the work that was going on. And in fact, that's what was happening, is there was more work going on that wasn't planned, that wasn't proactively put together, and it was more reactive work. And then just in the last few years, the explosion of really innovative software out there, integrating so that you could manage your work through Outlook and on mobile devices, and ultimately now the explosion of social UIs in the tool sets. So really we're in a situation now where I say the vendor solutions have overtaken the complexity of the work, and we see them being under-adopted and underutilized, and people haven't really didn't see that coming, that the tools have really become so capable. So a lot of the conversations we have here at Infotech are with customers who are reassessing, how they manage this work, and they're back, really driving out how do we get the tools adopted, and how do we, help them, help the organization succeed.
Hey, Barry, Barry?
Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, would you agree that some of the other EPPM enabling capabilities, contributing to this crossover would include things like the increasing configurability of EPPM systems and more flexible reporting?
Yeah, excellent question. So workflow being the big thing that I think really the first thing you mentioned, Wayne, the ability to actually put processes in the tools that are specific to not just your organization, but maybe the part of the organization you're working on, so that we've got more regimented approval and notification of progress, et cetera. Absolutely we see that in the reporting. Good question too. Most organizations are struggling to get a current view of what's going on.
Right. In terms of work complexity also, one of the trends that we're seeing in our customer base is really a focus or an emphasis by PMOs on simplifying process, or at least not giving into the temptation to define highly granular processes. The danger is that PMO is viewed as administrative, burdensome in terms of overhead, or worst case, the compliance police. Is that something you're also hearing among your client base?
Yeah, quite a bit, and trying to find the balance, obviously, in the sweet spot between governance and getting things done. That's a daily conversation for me around here.
Yeah, actually, this question is, where are you with respect to EPPM? So we're just trying to get a sense for whether this is something that you're just trying to get a basic understanding of and you're not really familiar with this approach. That's the first option. To you're kind of in some kind of formal investigation of EPPM strategies and systems. The third choice is you're in the process of actually going down this path of implementing an EPPM approach or an EPPM system. The fourth choice is you have some kind of strategy or system in place that you would be comfortable calling it EPPM. And the last choice is, you've been doing this for years. So please take a moment, let us know where you are on this continuum. And let's make sure this time we close the poll before you move forward.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So what are you finding it in Stantis, Wayne?
That's a good question. There seems to be plenty of folks that we're chatting with that are interested in this approach. I think we really focus on this as a differentiator for us. So where our message is so highly targeted towards people that are interested in this approach that we may have a bias towards seeing a lot more organizations moving forward. We have a number of success stories, people managing multiple initiatives simultaneously using our system, creating sort of culturally acceptable silos within the product to execute their various project portfolio types, and then using a system to do cross-portfolio type reporting, strategy alignment, resource management, et cetera. So, we are starting to see people implement this. I don't think it's mainstream yet, but we're seeing a very, very strong trend in this direction in our business, and it's the fastest growing part of our business.
So when you think about the enterprise-wide factors, is there a leading, governance framework or set of processes that people are converging around? As we've gone from the structure of IT work to the less structured enterprise-wide stuff?
In terms of who's leading the charge?
Yeah, and are we still talking PMBOK or COBIT or CMMI? Anything resonating there in terms of what customers are telling you?
Well, basically, people are very much focused on getting the process right, and then having a series of methodologies as tools in the toolbox, and not really wanting to be too prescriptive or out front with the methodology, being much more focused on a process that's flexible, that can incorporate various methodologies in different environments. So we got the results here, and this is interesting. I mean, I guess we are on the early bleeding edge with the broader group participating here. Most people, just trying to get an understanding of what this is all about. And then we have 60% of the people that are actually sort of formally moving down this path with not a lot of people actually, sort of having implemented something at this point. So, what this says obviously is that we're still in the early days, but looks like there's a lot of interest in the value proposition. Barry, how do you interpret these results?
I'd have to say that, again, when I look overall at what conversations come my way as an analyst, I even think that people are not as far down that path overall from what I talk to normally.
Right, because we do have somewhat of a self-selected audience of people interested in this topic, so that could create some bias there.
Mm-hmm. And I think the pace of change within IT has really crunched people down, so that there's been a lag in people looking to improve their processes overall. I think we're entering a period right now where a lot of us don't have a choice. Yeah, so this is the slide that I was referring to when I was talking about the comments that our customers make, about their rationale for starting down this road. And you know, I've kind of given the most obvious ones, but this is a long list, and really, I think it comes down to business pressures that are they look a lot more urgent than they did maybe 10 to 20 years ago. So it's this continual compression that I think people are really struggling with. And I threw this image up here of the ship. It's been, you know, my observation, you know, looking at the way we put teams together across department, you know, really making things harder to manage with the external factors that are going on around a project-driven organization. So it's this notion that we're hastily throwing together teams filled with people that are working part-time on multiple initiatives and needing them to get to, you know, manage that ship as it navigates the business and economic waters. So I think it's this threat from external factors that makes people wanting to get more precise in how they manage the collective instead of just managing it department by department. The third piece of rationale that I was looking at, you know, is the need to centralize a distributed model. This flow that I'm talking about here, I'm going back 20 years really when we talk about the decentralized model that appears on the left here. When we looked at enterprise-wide initiatives back then, it would tend to be you know, a collection of different departments between IT and marketing and even operations and corporate communications that would all work very independently of one another and probably somewhat sequentially. And then, you know, ultimately it's, you know, IT has done their work, and then marketing can start to talk about media buys and things like that to get a product out the door. With the, you know, the compression that we're talking about and the way we've really matrix designed our organizations, right now I kind of see it the way that picture is in the middle of a highly distributed kind of workforce that isn't managed in anywhere near the same way as it used to be. So we see a lot of you know, innovation and you know, point-to-point communications and people all working together, but we don't really have that centralizing force. And when we talk about EPPM, it's really about this concept of you know, still leveraging the multidiscipline teams that we put together, but coming up with this centralizing concept around an EPPM piece of software, so we can really take advantage of the way we've made things faster and address to the compression that goes on in our business and you know, product and service life cycles, but giving that ability to manage things better. So we talk a lot about, you know, so how can software like this help? The biggest thing that I see is really getting people, you know, aimed in the same direction, pulling on the rope the same way. And what I'm talking about is business strategy and program execution. The need to align strategically right from the beginning of a business idea has never been stronger, and I see EPPM doing that so that when a project starts to get executed and we build a program around a series of projects, it's something that has a lot of momentum and a lot more obvious kind of management momentum going from strategy to execution than we would have seen previously. And really, you know, recognizing the fact that when we're talking about building work teams across the enterprise, we just don't manage them the way that we all, you know, learned decades ago from IT, you know, in terms of the highly planned, proactive work that goes on. Things just are not organized the same way as they used to be. So we see EPM driving that different concept of what a team is and how to get that team organized. Capacity is the big thing that I've been focused on myself for a long time here, is that, you know, we're creating, again, these cross-departmental teams and trying to drive out some pretty complex things with, frankly, less planning than we've ever seen before. But the limitation ends up being, you know, what is the capacity of this organization? How many of these initiatives can we carry at the same time? And the fact that these are, you know, really part-time jobs for a lot of people. I talk to people every day that are, you know, on 5 to 10 initiatives all at the same time. So it's really hard to control the resources and understand the organizational capacity to do these programs. So we see EPPM helping, you know, to get that better sense soft as it is, just that better sense of how much can we do as an organization and how realistically can we set deliverable dates and market entrance timelines. And finally, that piece of our own reporting. When we've got these, when we've got initiatives going that are as complex and kind of unstructured as we have now, we need an even stronger ability to report on it, to get visibility into what people are doing, having the most current and realistic projections that we can get, and really looking at how those results are evolving over time. And I think the biggest frustration that I get from executives when we talk about this new world that they live in is that the whole resourcing side of it seems like a black box. And the EPPM tools are getting a lot stronger ability, not just to report on what's going on, but also to aggregate that with information coming from the other systems that they use.
Barry, don't you think it's interesting that we're still talking about visibility? Because that would seem to be the most basic or simple goal, but due to the increasing distributed nature in which work is getting done, like you talked about, and the accelerating speed that businesses are required to change in, it's still a fundamental and crucial goal. And we've been talking about it for a while.
Well, it is funny. If you go back 10 years, the way the whole industry was marketing itself through the era of enterprise project management and professional services automation and all the the iterations of this market space that we've been through, visibility was the buzzword, and it was something to be taken seriously, and it was certainly a goal, but it didn't really happen, I don't think. And a lot of that came down to really the adoption of the software and the need to make it more adoptable by by these very unstructured teams that we put together. So as important as visibility was from a marketing perspective 10 years ago, I think it's actually coming into its own now. What are you seeing, Wayne?
Well, I think when we talk about visibility, we're not just talking about increasing the scope of what we have visibility to because of the fact that everything is so distributed, but there's this temporal aspect to this as well. In other words, the focus has to evolve from getting visibility as to what happened to through reporting to moving to visibility to what's happening right now through business intelligence dashboards, for example, and then we got to get to visibility to what's going to happen based on more sophisticated scenario planning and analytics. You talked about projections on this slide, and I think that's where the world is going. It's moving from again what happened to what's happening now to really getting good visibility into the future.
Yeah, and that slide I used with the team sailing, it's about combining visibility into what's happening internally with visibility into the market forces around it. And when I look at the dashboard views that leaders are looking for, a lot more of it is about that combined view and really looking at everything from inventory to price sensitivity and things like that are external to it, because the market around them is changing so quickly as they're trying to build out products and services.
Yeah, that's a great image. That is a great image.
We've got another poll, though, and really interested here. If you look at your own organizational context, what benefits seem most compelling and achievable? So really hoping everybody can give us their view here. Yeah, sure, folks. So we've got a poll open. We're interested to know, where is your organization with respect to EPPM? And I think there's 5 options there. We'd love to get everyone to go ahead and answer that question. So, on your previous point, Wayne, I've got a coworker here who talks a lot about this concept of an adhocracy, and that's where, that's really where I see a lot of people entering the conversation, is that the whole planning and execution of work has turned into something that's very ad hoc, and
right.
With the advent of PMO and really the maturity of the PMO concept, that is their pursuit, is to find just enough governance to allow the machine to still work.
Okay, looks like I assume everybody can see the results of the poll. It's actually kind of interesting. There's a pretty even interest across all of the sort of major value propositions that we have for EPPM. What are your thoughts on this, Barry? Is this any surprises to you here?
Not really, and one of the interesting drivers for me here at Infotech is that we talk to clients across the entire spectrum of size and complexity and geography. So, if I compare it to my life as a vendor, Wayne, as a vendor, you're seeing people with the strongest appetite to make change in the near term. And in the role as an analyst, what I'm finding is I'm talking to people who are maybe lower down on that maturity scale at this point, and they might be 6 to 12 months from talking to vendors, but really trying to build the concept of a practice in the beginning. So I guess the balanced view doesn't seem like a surprise.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting that the kind of cost benefit is not that important anymore. People are thinking much more strategically about EPPM and looking for the strategic benefits as opposed to sort of the tactical benefit of kind of lowering your total cost of ownership around sort of the system consolidation idea. I think that sounds like a little bit of a sign of improving economic times, maybe.
So I have a couple comments, I guess, on what we see as the key challenges. And this one's a little bit of a friendly shot at people like me, I guess. People that are really part of the project management industry. But that first key challenge we see is we talk to customers a lot, and I would have said this as a vendor as well, where the product selection process, really sounded like, we're going to put our most knowledgeable people on it, so that people with PMP certification make the most sense. So we engage them to set down the road for product selection and really bringing these disciplines into the organization. And what I've seen is that the sophistication of, it's not just the tools, but more the configuration and the processes that people intended to build were probably coming more from a theoretical background or an optimal background, and where the complexity of what they were putting in outpaced the ability of the organization to work from it. And it occurred to me, it's like letting Michael Schumacher select your car, and inevitably you're going to have fewer people that can drive the thing. And was fortunate enough to find a picture of him leaving the racetrack. So that's really that key rub that people get, is that I think they're asking the question wrong, or they're asking the wrong question. It makes sense on the surface to make the question, which is the best tool? We're thinking about a tool. Well, let's pick the best one. Well, let's get our PMPs in the room and get them to set off on this process. But I don't think that's the right question. The real question is, which tool and vendor will best help us succeed? And there are no shortage of options out there in the world, but it comes down to that, picking something and configuring it and putting processes in such a way that they're really going to help the organization. And it may not, in fact, have to do with the user interface, etc. It's more about making your organization more effective. The second key challenge, and I guess this, as I said earlier, it's been the focus for me for a long time, is this concept of balancing the supply and demand of knowledge workers. When people first put in PPM tools and EPPM tools, they almost inevitably find that they put themselves in a dilemma. These tools are really great for understanding how to better select your investments and how to approve projects, how to build programs around existing projects. And what that, in fact, does is it increases the demand for the knowledge workers' time. So we've gotten really great at that, and the first iteration through the introduction of these processes and tools. But inevitably, the demand outpaces the supply. And so, what happens when the demand is larger than the supply? Essentially, if you go back to that historical perspective I gave a few minutes ago, we've got employees essentially deciding what doesn't get done. And we've got more demand, more work, more projects and programs identified than we have resources to work on. we're leaving it in the employee's hands to try to balance that supply-demand mismatch and understand, they're going to have to pick something that doesn't get done. So I think that, that ends up being the most painful discovery that people make along the way, is that they need to find that sweet spot of understanding what is that organizational capacity. And probably a corollary to that, that third key challenge is most organizations just don't have the appetite to allocate managers. Putting a governing software and a set of processes in place is good, but ultimately, that doesn't really take away the need for managers. And I've had to have the conversation a lot. That person who is juggling the requirements with time and money, the person who controls resources and expenditures, and yes, I always end up sending people back out to the dictionary. So it occurred to me, I guess, in the last decade that when we talk about project management and project portfolio management and enterprise project management, we're not really talking about management exactly. It's really a planning concept. And the tools, when I watch how they get used, it has more to do with planning and then less to do with managing. And I think we need to put that managing thing back into it and get people more targeted, at that whole, again, the matching of supply and demand, the alignment of the processes across multiple departments so that we can get the work done. And that's probably the most challenging conversation that I have as an analyst is with people that they want the outcome, but the organizations don't necessarily invest in project managers and managers for that matter to really help the people clear the way so that they can get the work done. And this is the fourth of our 5 sections for the talk today. EPPM roadmaps. Well, when we talk about roadmaps, we often don't want to, because the vendors have a great view of what it takes to get understand your goals and to get the tools in place to match up with that. But where the CIOs and the business leaders really need to focus is on those processes in between. And I think what I see a lot is a mismatch where the goals that people have in terms of how they're going to allocate funds and predict timelines and identify projects that are at risk, et cetera. Those goals are quite often set higher than their ability to introduce processes. So where we kind of differentiate, I guess, from the tool vendors is we're really encouraging our customers to look at those processes and to develop that workflow that will work for their organization before they go and assume that a tool is going to do the job. So it all comes down to how you're using things and putting those processes in first. So that's probably the number one business need that we end up addressing, more so than helping people understand their goals or pick tools. It's about how to put the processes in place. And finally, the question, who can we learn from? Really talking to your peers, and I think I've seen a lot of value in those conversations that people have at, in industry associations, et cetera, lately. What have other people found? And, I've got 4 points there. The first one being, what is the decision-making structure? It's quite common that an organization will, introduce a lot of the processes, and, whether they're looking to CMMI or COBIT or some other governance framework, but they might overlook that question of how do we make decisions. And if I were to differentiate between what I think kind of grows as a consensus decision model versus distributing the authority around, I would give you this shot that I think the consensus leads to, making it easy to approve things that you may not have the capacity to do. And that a distributed authority model, it places more obvious accountability for that resource capacity. So that's something that I think, talking to your peers would be really useful for. Again, related to that, it's this kind of concept that I think a lot of us have to live in the last year or two here. People are like gold. You can't borrow them into existence. And, just approving more work doesn't mean that you've got people to do it. And I think that's a big theme that business leaders are dealing with these days is realizing just how precious those resources are. and how much benefit there is out of making it easier for them by, that third step, managing what doesn't get done. And I think that, if there was any eureka that I'm most proud of is helping people work through, it's that, the best role of a manager these days, at some points it has to do with taking work away. And in a lot of cases, we just have too many pieces of work approved. This concept of benefit tracking, we're in a very disciplined business environment these days. We all think about ROI, and obviously to talk about return on investment, we need to understand what is the return, what are those benefits. It can be very challenging to legitimately track those benefits, and that's my big challenge for folks up front. If you're going to go down that road, you need to really be prepared to invest more in the quality of the business cases, the process with which you're approving them, and then ultimately being prepared to track benefits over time. And lastly, I wanted to make 3 points about what I've seen out of the vendors this last couple of years, and it's pretty exciting to make the tools useful and fun. But there's this real drive, for adopting the tools through collaboration, and recognizing what we're calling work management. 20 years ago, the majority of the work we were managing was proactively defined. Today, very little of it is. There's a lot of reactive work, and we need we need a better environment, obviously, for how to get people to work together and handle both kinds of work. And the second point where I've got here, resource management and right sizing of the goals. That was one of the things that first drew me to Instantis, actually, is a position they took with the resource management maturity model. It's a white paper that was on their website, and I thought, this is the most, upfront and frank I've ever seen a vendor get in terms of what it means to put in some of the highest levels of maturity, and really getting people, prepared to right-size those goals based on what their capacity is to deliver. And finally, then, estimation ranges. I see a lot more acceptance these days of flexibility in the planning concept. And I think if you guys go out and look at tools, like Instantis and the whole space, you'll see more flexibility for putting ranges to when we're going to finish the work, and less of the rigidity that was in the very, very mathematical and scientific tools that we worked with 20 years ago. So that was the end of my content, Wayne, and wanted to turn it back for a conversation and see what questions you're getting and what kind of challenges our viewers have today.
Okay, Barry, great. Let me see. You're pulling up the questions. Let's see. One question is, can you talk about connecting the dots between business strategy, EPPM, and prioritizing projects?
Connecting the dots between business strategy, EPPM, and what was the last one?
Prioritizing projects.
Okay. That's a really good question these days. First and foremost, it's this change, I guess, in draw that we've got. I saw a lot of IT-driven, IT-led organizations in terms of all these processes in years past, and it's the last 5 years or so, we've got a need to have IT very much plugged into the business strategy. And I'll give you the one gap that comes up all the time. Should IT have its own strategy? Should IT have 20% or 40% of its budget consumed just for IT? Or rather, should IT be going back to the business and saying, you need a business strategy that part of which reflects the need to have IT remain stable and with ample capacity, etc. So when we talk about connecting those dots, that's actually one of the most awkward parts of the conversation. Is, does the business strategy describe everything that the CIO needs to attribute all of their spending to business strategy? I don't know if there's a right answer, but that is kind of the central conundrum that we get into. In terms of connecting the dots, that's really this concept of governance and getting past a consensus-driven steering committee around IT spending, out into an enterprise-wide spending committee, if you will, so that there really is that overt justification on every spend that says what are the strategic roots of this? How do we manage the risks and rewards of doing it, and ultimately prioritizing? At the end of the day, it's about being able to prioritize within your capacity, and that to me is the big leap of what EPPM concepts and software are doing, is giving people that more immediate sense of can we actually approve this, can we deliver it by June 1st or whatever the date would be.
Another aspect I think, Barry, of this connecting the dots is whether or not you're connecting the dots from strategy to projects, or you're connecting the dots from starting with projects to strategy. So what we see as a fundamental difference between the EPPM approach is this assumption of that you're starting with your strategic objectives, and then you're ideating projects based on how they can contribute to or implement a given strategy. The traditional approach that organizations have is they have this notion of a project or a project idea, and then they kind of look upward for a line of sight between that idea or that project and strategy, and use it as a project selection criteria, which is a perfectly legitimate criteria to use. But if you're really going to be a strategic enabling function, you really need to start with strategy and then connect the dot to the projects. One of the sort of the fundamental things that we see people starting to look to EPPM to help them do.
Yeah, and it raises good questions about whether you're on an annual budgeting and planning cycle, so that you can, so that you're doing a broader view, a longer-term view of strategy, and then trying to fund things a year at a time, or whether you're in more of an adhocracy. And interesting when we talk about the growth throughout the enterprise, things are. I actually see things getting more structured. I'm wondering what you're seeing from the vendor side, Wayne, whether it's an annual process or a monthly process or somewhere in between.
I think we're starting to see people move more and more to SaaS environments, and there's certainly an association with more sort of annual and subscription type of deals. But essentially, the environments are different, and there's different motivations from one culture, one organization to the next. So we're seeing still a mix of people, going with sort of, both ways. But I think the trend for us as a business is certainly more people looking at kind of an annual kind of approach. Let's see, another, maybe a related question. What's the role of EPPM in the context of portfolio investment or project portfolio selection or project investment?
So the role of EPPM in terms of selecting the investments?
Yeah.
If
I got the essence of the question.
Yeah, I have to kind of put a vendor hat on for a sec on that one. I have seen just this incredible explosion of insight when people are sitting there contemplating a lot of competition for their spending, and not just IT spending, but across the enterprise. It may have been in years past that the decisions just seemed more obvious. Maybe just does it have an obvious link to strategy? But the competition for that spending has gone up so far. We just have this amazing set of opportunities in the software now to say, well, you know what, let's do a bubble graph between, strategic importance and, risk or things like that. And I just see a lot more discipline around how are we going to compare these things. And ultimately what it's driving is, I think the EPPM tools are driving more of a business case concept where we've got an achievable, consistent business case format that everybody's got to work within as they're pitching for those funds. So I think at the end of the day, more discipline, more consistency, more repeatability.
Okay. Let's see here. What's the high level of executive in your organization experience that accesses your PPM system directly. Example, dashboards or periodic reports. So, yeah.
Well, I think, you know what, I think those are three different questions, really. Really, because you said directly, which is, you know, people actually, you know, I would call signing in and using tools versus dashboards, you know, versus periodic reports. So what I'm seeing is that those distributed reports, probably through email, you know, they are reaching the top offices in the corporation now, where there, you know, there is a notification cycle or a process built around giving people the opportunity to find out what's going on. They might not take it. They might not open up the email, but I do see those reports going right up to the CEO. I've seen a couple cases where they were, you know, artifacts brought into board meetings. In terms of the dashboards, you know, I think you're a layer down now in the organization where, you know, still, you know, call that officers of the corporation have access to the dashboards. And again, they might not be looking at them on a regular basis, but there's that knowledge that they're available, that the insights are available to the leadership. In terms of people signing in, you know, I do see CIOs periodically signing in. With the, you know, the growth in financial disciplines around these tools, where we can actually sign in and look at, you know, more current and accurate spends and you know, budget consumption and things like that. I also see CFOs now literally signing in and looking at the tool. 10 years ago, I would never have seen that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the same thing. Certainly a lot of them like to get this stuff in email, but with the usability of some of the tools now, some of the reports, we're starting to see people log in directly. One of the questions, or more of a comment, is I'd like to see success stories to help me in building the PPM approach. And for those who share that concern, I'd like to point everybody to a really good webinar on our website, which you can access directly from our homepage, which is called the PPM at WR Grace. So we've done a webinar with one of our clients that's implemented multiple project portfolio types within Constanta's enterprise track, including Lean Six Sigma, new product development, moving to IT, mergers and integration. So all these different environments coexisting on our system, all configured to be culturally acceptable to each of those individual environments, but at the same time doing some strategy coordination and getting some of the other benefits that we talked about. Okay, another question for you, Barry. We have a PMO without any staff with an IT background. Our IT department is a large animal, and they have their own PM processes. Is that something we need to be concerned about?
Yeah, I would say yes. So large, very established, probably a traditional IT department that has its own processes, but the PMO is not strictly IT focused and doesn't have a lot of IT people in it. Again, very common. It makes you confront the question of, you know, what does the PMO actually do for a living? If I go back, you know, geez, it's coming up on 20 years since we first heard of PMOs. I had this assumption that they were going to actually help the organization manage projects that, you know, that span outside of IT. And, you know, obviously we've seen it grow into more, you know, governance and kind of program level or enterprise level stuff. That's really the first thing to confront is, you know, what is the PMO actually helping IT? You know, are they whether it's through tools or processes or resources, are they even involved in the IT projects? And frankly, my experience has not been that, you know, that we need to align the way IT does things with the way the rest of the organization does things. You know, we talked about that in the very beginning about, you know, differentiating PPM versus EPPM. You know, I think the assumption that the PMO has to govern the entire thing just might be false. I don't know. Okay. I'd be interested in the Instanta's view of that, though.
Well, we certainly see opportunities for PMOs to survive outside of IT. In fact, in order to be really successful as an enterprise PMO, the perception of your autonomy relative to IT is important in a lot of environments. At the same time, though, you need the sort of top-down executive support, and you need a staff. So I agree with your assessment on this particular situation. You need the support of the organization to have a sufficient staff that has the authority to put processes in place that other parts of the organization will follow.
Yeah, and if you go back to that, we talked about the roadmap. I'm just going to, for the folks that are still looking at the screen, I'm just going to step back a couple slides. If you step back here to this green arrow between goals and processes, and really focus on, the PMO's need to have processes that work for the whole organization, then I think you can really span it right through IT as well. It's just, I think that a lot of folks end up, having this sort of, brick wall up around the way IT does things. And frankly, a lot of those things need only be done in IT in terms of the how heavy the processes are.
Right, and there's certainly a coexistence that can happen between the IT and their own processes and their own PMO, for that matter, and an enterprise PMO, which has a broader edict.
Yep.
How do you see, Barry, how do you see firms measuring benefits? Comment here is, my experience is that it's hard for IT to hold the business accountable without involvement from the CFO.
Very, very true. Over the last month, we've reached out and talked to organizations that, again, across probably, every vertical you can imagine and every company size you can imagine, to talk about this exact question. How do you measure benefits? The folks that I would have thought would have no choice but to get very financial and quantitative in how they count benefits, a lot of them are just not succeeding with that attempt. So, what I think practically happens is more of a disciplined approach around at least qualitatively assessing the benefits. We might not really know, was this IT spend the sole reason why we got talk time down in the call center, or is this the sole driver to which we can attribute a growth in retention or revenue or something like that? It becomes a really difficult conversation when you're trying to tack things back to the original spend. But we can still look qualitatively at a lot of the spends in retrospect and say, the business case we approved, did it end up being true? We might not have believable hard numbers on it, but I think we still know, and that's the trend I'm seeing these days, where people are accepting that they might not get really great numbers out of it, but that they are interested in putting more accountability on the quality of those business cases in the beginning. So the purpose of benefits tracking really might have more to do with the quality of the next business case you see.
Okay. What would be a suitable way to introduce any low maturity organization to such tools without overwhelming the people who need to use the tools?
Really tapping the experience of the vendor. Every vendor's had their own experience with how to get the thing adopted and how much to adopt. And I kind of bristle at this as a former vendor. We're driven to add function to do a whole lot. These are suites. They're pretty amazing in terms of the function they have. But if I reflect back, some of the people that have had the most success have only adopted those few pieces that really drove better visibility and communication in the beginning. So it's really about a staged approach, because the fit of software to organizational dynamics is a really tough thing. So I think it's really about picking the right function, but also about at the end of the day, it has to be driven by management. Management has to be interested in what's in there, what's the reporting coming out of it, and how much is it helping the group. And, very few people are going to succeed without management really caring and being engaged and looking at the results.
Yeah, I agree, Barry. I think for us, a key for Instantis and our solution is really the configurability of the product, and really, sitting down with the clients, trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish, and configuring a product with just enough process to get that done. A lot of times we are really afraid to show the client everything the product can do because we don't want them to think, the product is too complex for their process. What we want to do is configure something that is just enough for what they want to do, and then give them a vision for how, as they mature, they can enable other various aspects of the solution to help the technology essentially mature with them. So most of the technologies today have a lot more feature and function than a lot of customers require to get started, and we're very sensitive to that.
Yeah, and my heart warms when I actually see an IT steering committee or a broader focused steering committee literally using the output from the EPPM tool as their meeting agendas, or as the way they're recording decisions, enacting decisions, and things like that. So when we get away from somewhere in these meeting minutes it says we approved a project, and the closer we get to clicking approve during that steering committee process, then I think that's really that necessary first set of steps to get an organization using it.
Right. Okay, Barry, actually right now we're at the bottom of the hour. So for those of you who cannot stay with us, I want to thank you for joining today's event. And for those that can stay on the line and want to continue to participate in the Q&A, we'll proceed with the Q&A session for at least, I'd say, another maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and try to answer as many of your questions as possible. But before we do that, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that if you would like to review a recorded version of this webinar or share it with your colleagues, please visit the Instantis website, www.instantis.com, and we'll have a link posted on our homepage in about a week's time for downloading the webinar, and I'm sure the webinar will be available for download from the Infotech Research Group's site as well. There's also been a number of comments or questions coming in asking for me to repeat information regarding where people can access the WR Grace EPPM success story. Again, you can just go to our homepage on www.instantis.com. On the right-hand side, you'll see an icon called Featured On-Demand Webinar, and you just click on that icon, and it will allow you to download the webinar immediately. So Barry, I assume you still have a few more minutes to hang on the line and answer a few more questions?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, great. Let's see. What is the best way to, let's see. How do I read that? The best way to speed up adoption is a training kickoff blitz to small groups. A comment, I guess, on that?
I might
comment on that comment?
Yeah, I might say it a little differently. And I agree with the concept, obviously, is that kickoff blitz and getting the information out there. But I try to take a little past training and talk about driving adoption. So in other words, we're coming out of a world where we would go in and blast people, fire hose them with here are all the features and things like that. And it's really about building those specific pieces of workflow before the rollout, and literally not just training, but leading people through those first weeks of adoption and getting the whole planning and execution cycle bound together. In making the training do that more so than just thinking of training as teaching. I want to think about training as using.
Okay. Let's see. shouldn't management drive the process with choosing features? Then vendors should interview the client to make sure all the needs are met. Comment on that?
Yeah, you know, it's valid, but at the end of the day, we've got such a mature space now from the vendor side that I don't know if it's about features. I think it's about workflow and processes.
Okay. Let's see. For implementing an EPPM approach, what is the first step?
You know, I think the first step is this green arrow that I've got. For the folks that are still looking at the GoToWebinar display, this green arrow that's matching goals and processes, that whole conversation is the first step. And you know, again, I think traditionally people would talk about their goals and get a feature list. That if I look at the RFPs that I've seen over the years, you know, it's a big checklist of features that people want. And you know, the maturity that I'm seeing in the last few years means the first step is more about what the heck are we going to do with it? You know, how are we literally going to run the business this way? More so than what features do we want?
You're right, absolutely. Let's see, here's another question. If you need to build EPPM momentum, where's the area of focus people tend to find most successful to start with? I think it's a similar type of question.
Yeah. Well, you know, the momentum side, I kind of go back to the visibility thing. When we get the ability, when we've got a you know, a leadership team that is consuming the output from an EPPM system and literally using that to tell them how they're progressing versus their strategy, to me that's the momentum driver. Is, you know, when you know that you're getting repeat visits from the leadership, either it's, you know, opening that email, launching it on their mobile device, you know, maybe even logging in. You know, that's the momentum driver, is the view, the information coming out of it.
What are the top integration points for a PPM software solution that you've seen, Barry? ERP, HR, vendor management?
You know, all of the above. But you know, I'm gonna go back to my you know, more of my mid-market days here and say that I think the top integration point is about that whole concept of work management. And when organizations still have you know, rooms full of people that are doing, you know, support, second and third level support, as well as project work and as well as other things, a service desk system is still a point of integration that I think I see most commonly down market. And then, you know, up market, it might be more integration into a business intelligence framework.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, what are the appropriate building blocks to introduce EPPM to organizations? I'm not sure how do you have a way of interpreting that? Make sense to you?
Yeah, building blocks to introduce the concept of EPM. You know, typically I think of it as a budget cycle. You know, a really ugly conversation I've had a lot of times over the years is, you know, okay, we're at the end of the year. You know, you planned out all of these things for the year that totaled 4,000 work months within your IT division, and you delivered about 40% of them again. And this would go on year after year after year. You know, to me, the building block is that talk about, you know, what were your strategic goals, and then how many of them got delivered, and the talk about where are the gaps, why is this happening, and the you know, view out towards an enterprise-wide view ends up being a big part of that rub these days, I think, Wayne, because you know, people are realizing that they're not working in isolation anymore, and that they probably need to be thinking about those enterprise factors more than just you know, the isolated departments.
Right. What would you consider the keys to ensuring the successful implementation of an EPPM tool?
Management, leading, and viewing through EPPM. When we've got decisions being made and then monitoring going on and management's engaged, I think that's the foundation of success for these things. We know that the people can work together better because of these tools now. The tools really have overtaken the work complexity. It's about getting management, plugged in and relying on it, using it to convey their wishes throughout the organization.
Okay. I think we'll wrap it up here, Barry. I wanted to thank everybody again for joining us today, and of course I especially want to thank Barry Cousins for an extremely interesting and thought-provoking presentation and for generously sharing his time for this protracted Q&A session. Barry, I trust you enjoyed leading this discussion as much as I enjoyed following it.
Absolutely, and thanks for the opportunity, Wayne.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to, before I actually turn the floor over to Jamal for closing remarks, I just want to again repeat that if you're looking, to sink your teeth into an EPPM case study, again, I encourage you to check out our homepage and check out the W.R. Grace EPPM webinar. And again, the web address for us is www.instantis.com. Some folks had some questions about how you spell Instantis. It's I-N-S-T-A-N-T-I-S. Again, encourage you to check out the Infotech Research Group website as well for more information on EPPM. And again, at this time, I want to turn it over to Jamal at Infotech Research for some closing remarks. Jamal.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. And thank you, Barry, for a very informative presentation there. I would also like to thank everyone who's still online for staying on and for attending the webinar. As I stated at the beginning of the session, all attendees will have access to the presentation material. You will receive an email with a link to the material in about a week to 10 days from now, and you will be able to download the presentation yourself. The full presentation will also be posted on YouTube, and again, the link to that will be included in the email that you receive. So once again, thanks everyone for attending the webinar, and we'll be signing off now.